For her 39th birthday, Terry Lamarty received a voucher from her husband for abdominal liposuction at Anthony Pignataro's clinic. When she met the doctor and entered the operating room, she immediately wanted to run away, but by then it was already too late. Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a renowned surgeon respected by almost everyone in the city. The Pignataro family had 2 sons, and Anthony was the younger one. After graduating from high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the United States. However, because of his poor grades, none of them accepted him. Instead, he was admitted to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his long training to become an ENT doctor. In 1978, while visiting his hometown at the age of 18, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club party. It was love at first sight, or rather, at first dance. The tall, handsome young Anthony instantly charmed the beautiful Debbie, twirling her around the dance floor to Donna Summer's hit Last Dance. After meeting at the club, Anthony and Debbie began dating. Their relationship was a long-distance one because Anthony was studying in Puerto Rico while Debbie was working in New York State. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York. Her family was not wealthy. In fact, they were constantly struggling financially. Debbie worked as a pharmacy assistant. When Anthony Pignataro graduated from medical school in Puerto Rico in 1985 and received his ENT diploma, he returned to his home state of New York. He kept his medical license and began working as a surgeon at a local hospital. Anthony's colleagues laughed at him, saying he was a complete failure in medicine, an incompetent professional who would hardly ever succeed in his career. Despite this, Dr. Pignataro was not dismissed from the hospital. That same year, 1985, Anthony and Debbie got married and moved in together. However, within the first year of their marriage, one of Debbie's friends told her that Anthony had a mistress. A devastated Debbie told her father, who advised her to forgive her husband, but only this once. Debbie listened to her father and forgave Anthony, giving him a second chance. Soon afterward, the young Pignataro family had a son, and a year later, a daughter. The family then moved into a large, spacious house in Amherst, a suburb of Buffalo, New York. There, the young doctor, Anthony Pignataro, started his own practice as a surgeon. He rented an office in a private clinic and began treating patients. By the end of 1990, 30-year-old Dr. Pignataro was already known throughout the state. He had invented a wig that was attached to the head with tiny metal pins surgically implanted directly into the skull. Anthony himself became the first customer to wear such an exclusive wig. The subject of hair loss greatly concerned Pignataro because he himself had started losing his hair at the age of 23. For that reason, Anthony developed his own exclusive wig with attachments and officially patented it. The prosthesis was custom-made for each client. Both natural and artificial hair of various lengths and colors could be used. In addition to implanting pins for wigs, Anthony Pignataro began performing breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuction, and many other similar procedures. The cost of Pignataro's work was not high. In addition, the doctor ran special promotions and offered generous discounts so that as many people as possible would come to him. About 7 years passed. Anthony Pignataro became rich, gained popularity, and began driving through the city in a brand new red Lamborghini. At that time, none of the locals could imagine what was really going on in this famous doctor's operating room. As a mother of several children, Terry Lamarty had tried everything to lose weight after 4 births. But she simply could not get rid of the excess fat on her stomach. She exercised every day, but the fat deposits she hated just would not go away. In 1997, for her 39th birthday, Terry Lamarty received her dream gift from her beloved husband, a voucher for abdominal liposuction at Anthony Pignataro's clinic. After receiving the voucher, Terry scheduled an initial consultation with the doctor and visited his office in Amherst, New York. She liked Anthony Pignataro as a doctor. Terry felt calm and comfortable during the appointment. The doctor seemed very charismatic and friendly to her. I had absolutely no concerns or doubts about Dr. Pignataro. He reassured me and said I had nothing to be afraid of and that everything would be fine, the woman later recalled. Terry began preparing for the surgery. She had all the necessary tests done, consulted the required specialists, and gathered the needed documents. In June 1997, at 8:30 in the morning on the appointed day, her husband brought her to the clinic for liposuction. First, Terry entered Dr. Pignataro's consultation room. He examined her, asked her to take some preparatory pills, then placed her in a wheelchair and took her to the so-called operating room, which was located in the basement of the clinic. When Terry arrived there, what she found hardly looked like a sterile operating room. It was simply a basement room with a couch, a table, and a few chairs. She did not see any of the instruments normally found in operating rooms. The doctor asked Terry to sit down and wait for a while. Her tension rose. She tried to say that she had changed her mind and wanted to leave, but it was already too late. The pills had taken effect. The woman began to stutter. She lost control. Terry could not say another word. She only moaned loudly and then fell into a deep sleep. When Terry woke up, it was already 5 p.m. She was fully dressed and sitting on a sofa in the waiting room on the ground floor of the clinic. Her husband soon arrived and drove her home. As soon as Terry entered the house, she immediately saw blood running down her legs. Alarmed, she began to examine her body. When she removed her clothes, she saw a surgical incision on her abdomen about 10 centimeters long and 2 centimeters deep. The edges of the wound were not bandaged. Around the incision there were approximately 20 metal staples. When Terry saw this, she and her husband immediately called Dr. Pignataro. Anthony tried to reassure the couple, saying that the blood was only excess surgical fluid and that there was nothing to worry about. The doctor assured them that the fluid would soon drain completely and the wound would heal. He recommended that Terry lie down, rest, and come to see him the next morning. Night fell, and the pain increased with every passing hour. Terry also suffered from constant nausea and vomiting. By morning, she could no longer bear it and called an ambulance. Terry was taken to the hospital immediately. During the examination, the doctors discovered that the stitches placed by Dr. Pignataro had cut off the blood supply to her abdomen, and some tissue was already beginning to die. It also turned out that the liposuction had damaged Terry's intestines, causing the wound to become infected. The woman was no longer fighting for a beautiful figure, but for her own life. Fortunately, Terry sought help in time, and she was saved. A few days later, while Terry Lamarty was still in the hospital, she was suddenly awakened at 2:30 a.m. by Dr. Anthony Pignataro, who had secretly sneaked into the hospital. He was holding Terry's medical records and ordered her to pack her things and go home immediately. Frightened, Terry refused and began arguing with the doctor. The nurses on duty overheard their conversation and forced him to leave the hospital immediately. After this nighttime incident, Terry Lamarty remained in the hospital for several more days. She was then discharged home, but her treatment continued for many more months. Although doctors reported the incident to the health authorities, this did not stop Anthony Pignataro from continuing his practice. Just 2 months later, an even more terrible tragedy occurred at his clinic. In August 1997, Sarah Smith, a 26-year-old mother of 2, ended up on Dr. Pignataro's operating table. She had dreamed for many years of getting breast augmentation. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Dr. Pignataro called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived at the clinic, they saw Anthony trying to clear the dying Sarah's airway with a coat hanger. There was no ventilator in Pignataro's operating room. The paramedics managed to resuscitate the woman using their own equipment. However, after Sarah was taken to the hospital, she fell into a coma. After about a week in intensive care, Sarah Smith died on September 1. News of the young mother's death spread through all the media. Dr. Pignataro did not hide the fact that Sarah had stopped breathing during the breast augmentation surgery. Anthony performed CPR and administered a lidocaine injection, but it did not help. He then asked his assistant nurses to call an ambulance. The Amherst Police Department launched an investigation into the death of the young mother, Sarah Smith. When the autopsy report was released, it turned out that Sarah had died of asphyxiation. The oxygen level in her blood was so low that her heart simply stopped. The toxicology report revealed that Dr. Pignataro had mixed 2 drugs that relax the body during surgery. The dose Sarah received was so high that she could no longer breathe on her own. Following Sarah Smith's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Dr. Anthony Pignataro's medical license. The investigation was taken over by the Erie County District Attorney's Office. As a physician, Anthony Pignataro had an excessively high opinion of himself. After opening his own plastic surgery clinic, he did not rush to hire an anesthesiologist or qualified medical staff. Instead, Dr. Pignataro worked with his wife Deborah, who had only 6 months of medical experience. The clinic also employed a young intern who was still in medical school. Anthony's wife and assistant reported that Sarah had suddenly woken up on the table during the operation and cried out in alarm. Anthony then administered an additional dose of medication, and Sarah fell asleep again. The doctor continued the operation, but Deborah soon noticed that the patient's oxygen level was dropping sharply. She informed her husband, but Anthony continued the procedure and paid no attention. After some time, Deborah noticed that Sarah's lips had turned blue, that the patient had stopped breathing, and that she had gone into cardiac arrest. Investigators interviewed colleagues and former patients of Dr. Pignataro and learned that many considered him a talentless quack. There were about 5 other patients who had suffered at the hands of this doctor. For example, 78-year-old Sophie Butrin had an experience similar to Terry Lamarty's. She developed serious complications after a tummy tuck performed by Dr. Pignataro. After the operation, Sophie felt unwell at home. She did not want to go to the hospital, but her son insisted, thereby saving his mother's life. Sophie spent about 6 weeks in the hospital. Afterward, she recovered and was discharged home to continue healing. The New York State Department of Health eventually brought 3 charges of professional misconduct against Dr. Pignataro. It turned out that Anthony Pignataro had never been licensed to perform plastic surgery. Pignataro's so-called surgical center, located in the basement, was not designed for the serious medical procedures he was performing. In January 1998, 38-year-old Anthony Pignataro was arrested and placed in a jail cell. In August of that year, he agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to criminally negligent homicide. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 6 months in prison. He also received a fine and was ordered to perform 250 hours of community service. In addition, Anthony Pignataro's medical license was revoked. Immediately after the verdict, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody. A weeping Deborah Pignataro, who was present in the courtroom, did not even get the chance to say goodbye to her husband. But if Deborah had known what awaited her, she would not have shed a single tear for him. In December 1998, Anthony Pignataro was released. He returned to his wife and children. However, the man could not find work. His mother helped him. It is known that she regularly sent money to her son. At the same time, Anthony had another mistress. When his wife learned of her unemployed husband's affairs, she threw him out of the house along with all his belongings. 2 months later, Anthony returned to his wife and once again begged for forgiveness. In May 1999, 42-year-old Deborah Pignataro suddenly became ill. She began vomiting regularly and feeling pain throughout her body. The symptoms came and went. Deborah felt tingling and numbness in her arms and legs. She could not walk for long and sometimes spent the entire day in bed. At the hospital, doctors could not determine the cause of her symptoms. Deborah's condition worsened day by day. The doctors were baffled. 2 months later, in the summer of 1999, the woman could no longer walk and was dependent on a wheelchair. Deborah had partially lost her memory and did not understand what was happening to her. Anthony Pignataro told his wife that the cause of her symptoms was a diseased gallbladder that needed to be removed immediately. However, Deborah's attending physician explained that surgery was dangerous and that the woman could die on the operating table. Soon afterward, doctors performed a toxicology blood test on Deborah Pignataro and discovered that her body contained a lethal dose of arsenic. A criminal investigation was opened into Deborah Pignataro's poisoning. After examining Deborah's hair samples, investigators discovered that she had consumed approximately 30 grams of arsenic in various doses since May. In a conversation with police, Deborah recalled that her strange illness had begun after she ate a soup her husband had cooked for her. Officials suspected that Anthony had added arsenic to the soup and had been poisoning his wife regularly. Deborah gave police permission to search the house. Investigators found an ant poison containing arsenic. It soon emerged that Anthony Pignataro had used his credit card to make a purchase at a store that sold that very substance. The man was summoned to the police station for questioning. Anthony did not deny that his wife had been poisoned, but he claimed it might have been done by relatives of his patient Sarah Smith, who had died after surgery. Anthony Pignataro was initially released because there was not enough evidence to prove his guilt. At that point, Deborah was discharged from the hospital. She remained in a wheelchair and continued receiving treatment at home. Soon afterward, a man who had shared a cell with Anthony called the police. The former cellmate reported that Pignataro had told him about his mistress and that his wife Deborah had life insurance. Anthony had confessed to him that he wanted to start a new life with a new woman and would very much like to collect the insurance money. The informant also reported that Anthony had asked him whether he knew how to poison someone. Phone recordings later confirmed that Anthony had remained in contact with his former cellmate even after his release from prison. After receiving this information, Anthony Pignataro was arrested on May 11, 2000, for attempted murder. Despite the accusations, he continued to deny his involvement in poisoning his wife. But just 6 months later, at the end of 2000, Anthony Pignataro pleaded guilty. The prosecution managed to prove that he had mixed small doses of poison into his wife's food and planned to send her in for gallbladder surgery. Anthony believed Deborah would die during the operation, and then everyone would see that he was not the only doctor whose knife had killed a patient. The man wanted to regain his fame and his money. He dreamed of justifying himself for the death of Sarah Smith. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 15 years in prison. It is known that even behind bars he continued to fight and defend his honor, claiming that his wife Deborah had taken arsenic herself and wanted to end her own life. Deborah Pignataro underwent lengthy treatment. In an interview, she stated that she had never harmed herself. She said that Anthony had poisoned her with arsenic. After the trial, Deborah divorced her husband and obtained a restraining order prohibiting Anthony from seeing her and their children. In December 2013, Anthony Pignataro was released from prison and returned to his home state of New York, where he took a job as a food delivery driver. 1 year later, he legally changed his name to Anthony Haut, while also using the name Tony Haut publicly. When asked why he had changed his name, he replied that he did it to start a new life. In 2016, he officially opened a new business, a cosmetics company. On the company's website, Anthony introduced himself as a practicing physician, offering botanical services and selling skincare products. It turned out that this time the enterprising former doctor had developed a secret anti-aging preparation and called it the Plasma Protocol. According to Anthony, it was the first and only skincare system developed on the basis of plasma derived from one's own DNA. The address of Anthony's new business was only about a mile from his former clinic, where he had once treated patients as a plastic surgeon. Anthony's new neighbors reported that they had called the police several times after noticing packages containing surgical supplies being delivered to the man's home, and after seeing various women frequently visit in the evenings. Immediately after those statements, the police turned their attention to Anthony's new activities. It is known that after the investigation, he closed his new business and moved from New York State to West Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. Authorities in New York warned police in South Florida about the former fake surgeon Anthony Pignataro, calling him one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. In 2019, Anthony Pignataro advertised his services on a website. It is known that he later worked caring for elderly people. Anthony Pignataro is free to move around the country. Authorities in Florida have kept an eye on him, but there is no guarantee that he will not harm anyone else. Anthony's ex-wife, Deborah Pignataro, lives a secluded life. She never fully recovered from what her husband did to her. Deborah lost her health. It is known that she still suffers from reduced sensitivity and limited mobility in her limbs. She depends on outside assistance. Thanks for watching, and take care.